But we begin tonight with what appears to be a big development in Iran. Opposition figures are calling for new protests there both tomorrow and on Thursday, amid signs that the regime is attempting to reassert control in ways that are ominous, given Iran's history of crushing dissent. Today, Iranian state television began airing statements from individuals who it says participated in post-election protests. These people are now being shown supposedly recanting their opposition views. The statements are being presented as if they're confessions, and they include explicit and, from my opinion, in my opinion, frankly, arcane and repeated claims that it's the Western media that's causing Iranians to attend opposition rallies. We have obtained some of these supposed confessions. We can show you what's been airing on state-run television inside Iran. The translation from Farsi to English for these statements was done by Reuters. Our staff here at MSNBC used those written translations in order to voice over the tapes in English.
I was influenced by Voice of America Persian and the BBC because they were saying that security forces were behind most of the clashes. I saw that it was us protesting who were making riots. We set public property on fire, threw stones, attacked people's cars, and broke windows of people's houses.
I came to Tehran for cell phone-related work, but when I saw it was chaotic, I started stealing. We took advantage of the large crowds on the streets and the riots to steal. I think we were provoked by networks like the BBC and the Voice of America to take such immoral actions.
We were provoked by networks like the BBC and the Voice of America to take such immoral actions. We'll leave it to you to assess how genuine these confessions are. Politically, it's important to know that this is what the Iranian government is broadcasting to its own citizens now. For an American audience, of course, these confessions evoke eerie parallels to the forced confessions from Americans held prisoner in wartime, broadcast as essentially wartime propaganda. Now, professional journalism is all but completely extinguished in Iran now. The Iranian government confirmed today that a Greek man reporting for the Washington Times in Tehran was arrested last week at the Tehran airport as he attempted to leave the country. We've also had BBC Persian today detailing how they are reduced almost entirely now to showing material that is sent into them by ordinary citizens from Iran. In this vacuum of independently verified information, the government is presenting its own version of reality to its citizens. For example, consider the case of the footage that we showed last night, the gut-wrenching and iconic footage of a 26-year-old woman named Neda Agha Sultan, who was fatally shot during a protest in Tehran on Saturday. The video of her death has been circulated and described all over the world. It was even referenced directly today by President Obama.
I think that when a young woman gets shot on the street, when she gets out of her car, that's a problem. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And I think that anybody who sees it knows that there's something fundamentally unjust about that.
Remarkably, today, Iranian state television suggested that the footage of this young woman dying in the street was staged. Quoting an unnamed source, Iranian TV said that filming of the scene and its swift broadcast to foreign media suggested that the incident was planned. The implication, of course, is that opposition protesters either shot this young woman or made it look like someone shot her in a propaganda effort. According to reports, Iran's capital stood eerily quiet today as journalists and hundreds of opposition supporters sit in jail. Some of their purported confessions among the only messages now being broadcast to the Iranian people. Joining us now is NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. He was in Tehran reporting on the presidential election up until essentially the moment his visa expired. Richard, thanks very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
What's the significance of these purported confessions being broadcast on Iranian state TV?
Iran is really trying to write its own history and seems increasingly detached from the rest of the world. Iran is building a case that the protesters have no legitimacy, that they are foreign-inspired rioters, or that they are young people who were simply misled by the media. And it is a case that many Iranians themselves aren't believing. Some clerics, they saw that there were up to 1 million people on the streets in the early days of this protest, and it seems very illogical for them to say, how can 1 million people all be terrorists, all be delinquents or people who are so easily misled.
When I, as an American observer, look at those propaganda efforts today from the Iranian government, they seem to me incredibly ham-handed. They therefore seem like a sign of desperation, and they seem like the sort of thing that will impose a self-inflicted wound in terms of the legitimacy of the government. How many Iranians also see it that way, or am I just really looking at this through a Western lens that doesn't translate?
This is only part of an Iranian crackdown that began this weekend. So on Friday, the Supreme Leader said there will be no more protests. Yeah. That unleashed the militias and unleashed the Basij onto the streets. Saturday and Sunday, there were violent clashes. And then, since then, you've seen this insidious crackdown where hundreds of people have been arrested, some people just disappearing, others have been shot. The cries that they've been calling out at night, a lot of people have heard them. They've been calling out Allahu Akbar. Sometimes they were calling out I am Neda as well, in reference to that young woman who's been shot. Today, Iran banned those as well and asked people if they heard their neighbors calling out Allahu Akbar at night, which has become this rallying cry, to inform on them. So it is becoming a type of police state. There has been no official martial law imposed, but any gatherings of 3 or 4 people are quickly being broken up. It has gone into a deep repression, and I don't think the government is concerned about the outside image right now. It is mostly concerned about keeping people inside and off the streets.
It also seems unconcerned, though, about its legitimacy in the eyes of its own people. I mean, in a country as deeply religious and conservative as Iran is, not talking about the regime, but among the people, how legitimate can a government be that literally bans its citizenry from shouting God is great into the night sky?
It is that, and that is the problem. And you see some contradictory statements from the government. Today, the group that is supposedly monitoring the election said there were 5 more days to submit claims about election fraud.
Yes.
But at the same time, it also announced that President Ahmadinejad would likely be sworn in late in July or early August. And it is these mixed messages that the government is trying to send that many people think is just really tap dancing. They're just trying to buy time and show the people a little bit that they're taking these claims seriously as long as they stay off the streets. But it is a problem. This conflict has gone into a new phase. I don't think you're going to necessarily see major street demonstrations over the next few days.
So these protests that have been called for Wednesday and Thursday, you're not expecting them to be?
It might happen.
Yeah.
It might happen if the leaders come out themselves. If Mousavi comes out, I think if he does, he'll probably get arrested, and manages to bring a lot of crowds onto the street, then you could have clashes. But it seems like we're entering into a longer, protracted fight.
Briefly, Richard, any threat of a general strike if Mousavi is arrested?
There's talk about a general strike, and that's what they want to do. They want to transform this from a clash with the government, and the government has been ruthless and effective at it, into a general strike and shut down the ministries. But Iran is not that wealthy of a country. A lot of the middle class simply don't have the savings to carry out a strike. And all of the organizers have been picked up. There's a real mood of melancholy, of fear on the streets, and people are worried if they get engaged in a strike or any kind of political activism, they'll be detained. Human rights activists who are simply gathering names of people who've disappeared have been disappearing themselves.
NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, it's always great to have your insight on this stuff, Richard. Thanks.
It's a pleasure.